In India, cities have grown very quickly in the last 2 or 3 decades. They've grown more rapidly than governments can provide infrastructure or create a semblance of stability in the city, right? And so what has emerged is a kind of temporary city, which let's say a kinetic city, which is pulsating, which is changing, which is the sidewalks in our city change every morning because depending on who lives there, what new stalls appear, what gets dug up, etc. And so it's a kinetic city, and the kinetic city is a city that grows where people expand the margins of the city to accommodate themselves. So yes, you can call it an informal city. And I don't like using the word informal because then you begin to set up a binary between the formal and the informal. For me, the kinetic is a form of urbanism that both the poor and the rich engage with. The poor engage with it much more. The fact that the rich build shamianas on maidans to have very opulent weddings is also the kinetic city, where the margin of the city is expanded. So the city then, in our condition, as a result of this phenomena, is not about grand vision, but it's about grand adjustment. And that's a whole different way of perceiving and looking at the city, and even how we prepare ourselves or intervene in the city. Because the moment the temporal landscape becomes an effective tool, it opens up many possibilities. And I think that's fascinating and hasn't been paid attention. Our governments, our planning rhetoric, our planning education, our approach to planning is only concerned with the static city, which is the city beautiful, which is a city about stability, settlement, which is the European cities. And you don't see people, they're dead. And in Indian cities, there are too many people, and the physical form of the city seems dead. And I think, of course, the ideal condition is a balance. And the West looks to the East and romanticizes the human energy, and we look to the West and romanticize the stability in the physical form of the city. And I think the great challenge is, for the world, is how do you reconcile these two? And there's a discipline of architecture and there's the discipline of planning. And urban design grew out of the need to bridge those two, because the planners became highly abstract in their thinking as policy. And the furthest they could push an imagination of the city was blobs of color on a land use plan. And that became their city. And architects became like blinkered-eyed and became very site-specific. And so were very content and satisfied by being given a site and told what the setbacks are and what the FAR were, and then it was architectural acrobatics, and totally unmindful about adjacencies. And that's why I bring the question of adjacencies back again. And so then, as some architects became mindful and sensitive to the question that what makes a city is how these adjacencies add up, because that's what creates a synergetic kind of relationship, urban design as a practice grew. And it was first sort of instituted at Harvard exactly 50 years ago, this November in 2010. And the idea was to create a professional who had the ability to create this kind of feedback loop between planning and architecture, who understood what form making was about, and could also understand the language of the planners and imagine and represent what would be the implications of certain policies. And if those policies were changed, what would be the implication on form. You need a professional and groups of professionals who think of the problem differently. I think the modernist city was fortunately or unfortunately driven very much by architectural imaginations and sensibilities, and architects were always the sort of leaders in that role, and physical form as a result of that drove the process or the imagination about these cities. And from that came urban design. When architecture became big, the practice of urban design evolved, and I differentiate, I use the word practice very carefully, because it's not a discipline in the way planning is, for example, and I'll come back to this because I think that I think is an important difference. And so architects naturally grew into the role of then urban designers and began to determine urban form. And other disciplines, and especially the social sciences that would have informed the process, were not integral to that. So architects were the ones who was driving it, because intrinsically the social sciences were not about projective thinking, rather retrospective analysis that might inform other disciplines. But those links were so weak that information flows were not ingested or digested or even engaged with by architects, and this was a problem. So obviously in this new kind of paradigm, this in the same way as the physical form of the city is a burji, the education of a professional, the mindset of the professional has to be much more scrambled and much more light-footed in the way it can engage with these different disciplines and nourish itself continuously from the inspiration that the inspirations and knowledge that these disciplines can provide. And I think that is a very important shift. The IIHS is something that's incredibly well timed. The two big problems in India are of capacity for professionals. We don't have the capacity of professionals who can not only bring particular skills that are needed for our cities, but also a kind of imagination, a projective imagination, because if we have to create sustainable cities, we have to be embedded in the future, not in the past. The people who are making cities in India today are people who deal with impatient capital, the finance markets, who are living 30 years ahead of the day because all their visions are going to be realized then. And planners and architects, unfortunately, look at the past for inspiration. So they're looking backwards. And I think the IIHS, just in the nature of its formulation, is about projective thinking, it's about anticipation. And I think it's going to be a critical institution for the future of Indian cities, because it will provide this imagination and the skills that need to go with it. And I think its ambition is one that it will, I think, address the question of capacity squarely.